So hi, I'm Patty Lutsky. I'm Product Management Director, coming to you from the suburbs of Boston. And my topic today is Windchill Translation Management, some advanced topics. Now, I realize some of you may not be familiar with Windchill Translation Management. I will provide a brief introduction just to set the stage, but I also want to point out there is a existing webinar on our Arbortext YouTube channel that goes into just the basics of what is Windchill Translation Management and it sort of goes through an example and that sort of thing. So this talk is going to cover some advanced topics, but of course, if you wish, you can go there for for the basics. Okay. So this is my agenda for today. As I said, I'll start with a brief overview. Then I have a section explaining how Windchill links interact with translation, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about just how Arbortext uses Windchill links and why it's important to make sure that your links between documents are correct. And then I go into three different, what I consider advanced operations. So these are things that wouldn't necessarily come up um, in a basic environment, but there are things that I've gotten questions about, and I thought it might be instructive to go through. And as you'll see, they kind of touch on some additional information about how the Windchill translation works. So first, the overview. So the general idea with Windchill translation is that you've got content that's stored in Windchill that was written by Arbortext, and this might be topics, and it could also be content that was developed using Service Information Manager Service Parts, which the new product name for that is Service Parts Information and Instructions. So it could be parts list, could be topics. The translation management capability will gather together that content that needs to be translated, and it'll create what we call a translation package, which is a zip file that contains that content that needs to be translated. Then that content would be sent out to a vendor, a language service provider. So PTC is not a language service provider. This would be a third party, whoever you happen to be working with, that would do the actual translation. Then when they're done, they'll provide uh, the zip file with the translations in it. So the individual files will have been edited to contain the translations. And then you put that zip file in a folder that Windchill is watching. And then Windchill will import those translations, create a new version of the translated documents in Windchill, and link those translations to the source. Then once that's done, you can use Arbortext Publishing Engine to publish it out, either to PDF, to Arbortext Content Delivery, or to other delivery systems that you might be using. And just to be clear, so the scope of what I'm talking about, the scope of the Windchill translation management, it's really the creation of the zip file and then the importing of the zip file and the management of those translations, keeping them linked to the sources. Now, one other topic just to mention, again, for people who aren't familiar with Windchill translation, is the concept of XLIFF. XLIFF is a standard XML specialization that is used to represent translations. So it's an industry standard. And in particular, we use it for translating the attributes, the translatable attributes that might be in your Service Information Manager structures, in your information structures or publication structures, or in your parts lists. So out of the box, the only attribute that's set up as translatable are the titles. But you can set up other attributes to be translatable. I'm not going into that today, but that could be a topic for a future webinar. Um, so what I'm showing here is an information structure. You could see the outline. It says for WD wheel loader, attachments, axle, etc. And then a snippet of the XLIFF that would be used. So this is what would be sent out to a translator. At this point, it hasn't been translated yet. You can see that both the source and the target both have the same content. Once this was sent out to the translator, it would come back, and where you see the target, and it says XML lang equals FR, so this would be the French XLIFF, the translation vendor would have put the French string in the target field of the XML file, of the XLIFF file. And then this XLIFF is used to then update the data in Windchill for these particular fields. Okay, so that's the background information I'm going to give. Now I'm going to jump into my advanced topics. First one has to do with Windchill links. Now, Arbortext content is stored in Windchill in a type that's known as dynamic document. This is a document that can have attributes on it, and it can also have these links to child documents. And that's the way the parent XML document is linked to children such as graphics, if there are graphics used by the XML, X-includes, or entities. And there are two types of links that we particularly use for dynamic documents. One is called an EPM member link, and one is called an EPM reference link. Now, the member link is for required dependents. So this is for the graphics. The idea is that if you've got a document and it uses a graphic, if someone were to delete that graphic, you would essentially have a broken document because it would be pointing to something that no longer exists. So that's what's called referential integrity in Windchill. If you're using a member link, you're not allowed to delete the child as long as it's still being used by a parent. So the member link will enforce the referential integrity. And when you're using Arbortext Editor, we'll always create member links for graphics, for entities, or for X-includes. Because again, if you've got a document and let's say you've got an X-include to something like a caution or a warning, well, you don't want someone deleting that caution or warning, and then you've got a document that's missing something. Now, on the other hand, the reference link is for non-required dependents. For a reference link, the referential integrity, it's not enforced. You can delete it even if there's a reference link to it. And it's generally used for cross-references, the XREF tag in XML. Or if there's other links where the target, it's not technically part of the document, it's more like a see also or that type of a link in your document. Now for conref, out of the box, we have it set up to use a reference link. And the reason is that when we are linking a conref, when we create this reference link, it's going to go to the entire document. It doesn't go to the specific content that you're conrefing in DITA. And so we felt it was misleading to use the member link for that. And instead we used the reference link. But it's configurable. If in your environment, if it makes more sense to use the member link for conrefs, then that's available. And I think it's 2 slides from now, I show that you would set that in your what we call burst configuration file. Now, this slide, again, is sort of a response to questions I've gotten over the years. But where are these links used? Where are reference links, member links used? And this is really those places that are most important to people who are using Arbortext or using Service Information Manager, service parts. And you can see they're used in quite a few places. So they're used in the Arbortext browser, that's this display here. Um, in this case, there's a document called Fire Extinguisher, and you can see that it uses two graphics, and we display that. We allow you to expand the compound document to see the children. Now, we only show member links in the CMS browser, not the reference links. In the Windchill structure view, again, you can see anything that's referenced via a member link. And also in the Windchill view, you can set up a custom tab to see the reference links. You would just set up you would use the related objects CAD/dynamic documents into your configured tab, and then you would see any documents that are linked via reference. Also in the Windchill collector, that's what this is showing here. Again, you have the option. You can include all. You could only include the required, so that would be only the member links. Now, also when we publish, so when we publish a SIM structure, an information structure, or a publication structure, we use these links to identify what additional documents should be included in what we call the payload, the compilation of content that gets sent to Arbortext Publishing Engine. So again, it's important to get the links right so that when you publish, all the required information will be sent to Arbortext Publishing Engine. We also use it in Arbortext Editor for optimizations. In this case, when you open a document in Arbortext Editor, if it has member links, we will, in some cases, pre-download the content that's linked via a member link. And the reason for that is so that, for instance, if you've got a large document and you're scrolling through in Arbortext Editor, you don't want it to pause when you get to one of these let's say X includes, and have it then go to Windchill, download it, and continue. By pre-downloading, it provides for a smooth scrolling through the document. Now here's, of course, the topic of today, in translation. In translation, when we create a translation package, we will include any documents that are linked either by reference or by the member links in your translation package. So the idea is that if you're translating the one, you're translating the entire document set. And then in checkout, and this people who are familiar with Arbortext Editor's Windchill integration knows when you do a checkout, it will provide a prompt where it says, do you want to check out all dependents? And again, in that case, it will check out those dependents linked via a member link. If you choose to, you can choose to only check out the current document. Now, as I said, the way that these links get set up is in Arbortext Editor when you do a check-in. And what determines the way the links get set up is your burst configuration file. So again, for graphics or X includes or entities, it's the boundary spec part of your burst configuration file. I'm not going to go into great detail here. This is all documented in Help Center in terms of setting up burst configuration files and what the different options are. And again, that could possibly be a topic for a separate webinar. But the general idea is if you specify file ent equals on, then it will indicate that both the includes or file entities should be imported as children and the member link should be created. If graphics equals on, then any graphic files would be imported and member links created. Now for something like a conref or an xref, you actually have the choice. And again, I won't go into all the details, but the gist is that there's two options. There's one called DITA full, one called DITA partial, and you can choose whether you want what we call DITA full, which would create the member link, or DITA partial, which would create the reference link. And even though it has the word DITA in the title, it's not just limited to DITA doc types. You can choose to create reference links for other doc types as well. So as I mentioned, when we do the create translation package in service parts, information, and instructions, what happens is you have chosen either an information structure or a publication structure, and you actually can also choose a subset of it. You could choose what we call a information group or a publication section also, or you've chosen a particular dynamic document. And the logic will loop through the structure, or if it's just one document, that particular document, and it'll consider any children that are linked by both member links and reference links. It'll look at an attribute. This is an out-of-the-box attribute that we call PTC-DD translate. If that has been set to yes, then you've indicated that yes, you want this to be translated. Because sometimes graphics don't need to be translated. Graphics might only contain a picture or a content that doesn't contain any text that needs translation. In that case, you would set it to no. But if it's set to yes, then it'll check to see whether that particular document is in the preparation state, that it's in the oftentimes that's the release state. If so, then we include it in the package. If not, if either, the translate is set to no, or if it's not yet in the correct state, it will not be included in the package. Now, for a compound document, so if you're only translating a compound document, or if there's a compound document in your structure, all children that have this PTC-DD translate equals yes must be in the correct state. Otherwise, the entire compound document is considered not in the correct state and will not be included in the package. So if you're doing let's say an information structure, we'll only include those documents that are indicated as ready for translation, where the entire compound document is ready. And if it's not, then it'll be skipped. You can, at a later date, create another translation package, and it again will loop through and pull in anything that has not already been sent out for translation and is now in the correct state to be ready for translation. So the links are very important. It's what is used by the translation management logic. And the translation management logic does not look in the XML code. So if in your XML content, you might have, say, an XInclude, and it's including a child document, if you have not set it up, if for whatever reason that link didn't get created properly, there isn't a member link, then that child document will not be pulled into the translation package. So it is very important to make sure that the links are set up properly. And in the case of the XInclude, it's just the one setting, but in the case of conref, you want to make sure that you are including it properly in your burst configuration file. Okay, now I'm going to go into three particular operations that, as I said, they're not the basic operations. They're a little bit more advanced, but it gives me an opportunity also to show some of the general concepts of translation. This first one is partial import, and it's been available for quite a while, since 11.0 M10. The idea here is when you create the translation package, as I said, you will include individual files for each document that is available to be translated. And what we see here is We're translating a publication structure, and that publication structure, again, it's simple so that I can go into detail on my explanation, but it contains two documents. The first document is an XML file that references one graphic. The second document is an XML file that references a graphic and has an X-include to a caution. This happens to be a caution about working with electricity. Now, this is the contents of the translation package that gets created for that publication structure. You start with the log file. This would be a text file that includes information about each of the documents that are included in the package. You've got what we call the translation manifest. Essentially, it's just an XML version of the log file. So it's an XML document that contains information about each of these documents. Then you can see we've got the XML parent document. We've got a graphic, the second XML parent document, the graphic, the XML fragment, and then we've got that XLIFFS file that I mentioned earlier. This would contain the titles from your publication structure. So in this case, it would have things like overview, troubleshooting, table of contents in that XML file. Now, so I've got a translation package with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 documents to be translated. With a partial import, you don't necessarily have to translate all 6 documents and import them at once. What you can do is translate some of the documents and import the parts of the package that are available when they're available. So in that example that I gave, it's possible that for the graphics, you would be sending them out to one translation vendor that specializes in translated graphics, whereas the XML content might go to a different translation vendor that will translate that. In this case, what you could do, let's say the graphics come back first, you could just import the graphics first. You would only include those 2 documents. And then when you get the other documents back, you would import those. So again, it gives you flexibility. You don't have to wait till you get everything back. Now, when you do that, don't modify the manifest. Even though the manifest in this case would contain 6 documents, and let's say you're only importing 2, that's okay. We will just use the manifest to understand where in Windchill those 2 documents should go and ignore the other 4 that aren't in the package. Now, one thing to note is that if you import part of a package, then that means that package is no longer available to be canceled. You can only cancel a translation package if you have not imported any of its content. You can do more than 2. I mean, my example showed 2, but there can be as many partial packages as you need in order to get all the content into Windchill. And now this is an advanced topic on top of the advanced topic, but there is a what we call an XConf, a system-wide configuration setting. And this allows you to identify what should happen with content that is being re-imported. So if I go back to this example, what if your first package you imported the 2 documents, and then in your second package you actually put all 6 documents. So you've got the 2 that were imported, and now you've got the 4 new ones. That could happen. Well, this setting just allows it indicates what should happen with that. Does that mean that you want to re-import those 2 that were already imported? Maybe it's an update to them, or should we just ignore it? Basically, those 2 were already imported. Only look for things that have not yet been imported. And it's a system-wide setting. In general, it tends to be a business practice. Is the way that your packages are coming back, will it mean that anything in the package should always be imported, or does it mean that any previously imported content should be skipped? And that's the default, is that we just skip it if it's already been imported. Or do you want it re-imported and iterated? Okay, so that's partial import. My next example is reuse existing translation. And this is a more recent operation that we've added. We've added this one in 11.1 M20. And the use case for reuse existing translation is that there are some times when the source that's going to be translated, it gets iterated, but in a way that will not affect the translation. So for instance, it's possible only metadata got changed. So even though a new iteration was created, you know that the existing translation, it's still good. And you don't want to have to spend the money to send that source out to the translation vendor, get it back, and it's going to be the same that you already had. So we provided this reuse existing translation operation. And then also, as those of you who are familiar with translation management know probably all too well, you can only ever have one translation per revision. Revision is the larger um, uh, number. So for instance, if you've got like A.1, revision would be the A part, iteration is the .1 part, 1, 2, 3. So for the A revision, you can only ever have one translation. So if you do need to retranslate, you essentially have to cancel your translation and then retranslate. So what this does is it saves you having to do that. If you know that the translation is still good, you can just update it so that we reuse what's already there. So I have some screenshots to look through this. We start with a translated document, and you can see the translated document is at the A.1 state. It has already been translated to Spanish, and the translation is in the A.2 state, and it's set, it's released, it's been translated. Now let's say we iterate. We iterate the source, so in this case it's an English source. We iterate the source to A.2, but we know that the translation's still good. Now, right after you iterate it, it'll say, oh, new translation needed, because as far as Windchill knows, you made a change, you need to retranslate. But if you do this reuse existing translation action, it'll bring up a dialog box. It'll give you a choice of which languages to affect. In this case, I only had the one for simplicity. We're going to choose the Spanish. And then what it'll do is it'll set, so we've still got the source of A.2, and it is reusing the already existing translation, the A.2 version. And you could see once again, we're back to translated released. So we didn't have to do a whole translation pass of sending it out, getting it back. We were able to just reuse the translation that already existed. Okay, one more. So this is, again, an advanced operation that's available. This one has been available for a long time, 10.2 M22, but it's a little more obscure. But I thought to mention it in the case that it's useful for some of you. So the use case for replace as translation source is that you might have multiple authoring sites that have differing authoring languages. For instance, one set of documents is authored in Japan, they're authored in Japanese and then translated to different languages. Another set of documents may be authored in Germany, in German, translated different, etc. And there are some times when, because of changes in organizational structures, you might want the set of documents that had been authored in Japanese to now be switched over to the German group or something along those lines. So we do provide an action on a compound document that allows for changing the authoring language. The idea is this document might also be included in multiple, say, information structures or publication structures. And this will update any uses of that document so that now not only is the document set up properly and with the changed source language, but also any uses of it will also point properly to that new source language. So I have sort of a schematic to show the way these documents are stored in Windchill. And the general idea here is that you've got your information structure, in this case, an information structure group. It would be pointing to a content holder. Oops, that should have said Korean. Sorry about that. The content holder would be in Korean and the Korean source. Now, we have a link type that's used in Windchill called a translation link. The translation link points to any of the existing translations. And even if there's a pivot language, it'll still point to any of those translations. And I don't go into detail about what's a pivot language. The general idea with a pivot language is that there are some cases where rather than translating directly, you might translate from your source language, let's say in this case to English, and then you translate from English to all the other languages. There are some cases where it's just cheaper, where translation vendors are more able to work with certain languages rather than others. Now, in this case, we had a source document that was in Korean, and we want to change it so that now the source language is going to be in French. And so there's an action on the dynamic document. It's called Replace Translation Source. It'll bring up a dialog that'll let you select which language should become the source. And it's only going to show source languages. So as you saw, in this case, there are a number of languages set up in the system, but we'll look at your source languages preference to see, all right, which of these languages could possibly be source languages. And in this example, we've got English, French, and Korean as the possible source languages. Now, if you select the French one, the next thing that it'll show in that wizard, it'll show you any uses of the document. The idea here is to make sure there aren't any surprises. So if you're changing the source, you want to make sure that you know all the places this document's been used and that it's reasonable to change it. And then there will be a confirmation. This isn't the kind of thing that we want casual users doing. This is a pretty exceptional situation. It's the kind of thing that would only, as I said, happen in the event that maybe you've got a change in your organization or you want to change the authoring language. It's not recommended to do this on a regular basis. But so there will be a confirmation dialog, and then once you click OK, let's say you know what you're doing, you really want to change the language. So now it adjusts the links, the translation links in Windchill. Now, instead of having the content holder in Korean and the source was Korean, you've got your content holder in French. The source is now French, and you can see Korean is now considered one of the translated languages. So we still have all the other translations that we had from before, but now what had been the translation, the French, is now considered the source. So going forward, you would only ever edit the French, and you would go through the translation process to update any of the other languages. And as I said, it'll adjust any structures, any information structures, publication structures that are using that document. It'll adjust those to now have the correct authoring language and point to the correct source.